In the last video, I attempted to approve a given request. I've now waited a couple seconds for that transaction to go through, and I'm now going to refresh the page. When I do so, I should expect to see my approval count right here increment by 1, and it definitely just did. So it looks like using the approve button right here worked just the way I expected. Now there's definitely some better signaling we could give to our users to let them know that, hey, that thing just went through and all that kind of good stuff. We'll take care of that additional polish in just a moment. But before we do, I want to make sure that I also implement this finalize button as well. So recall that whenever a request gets enough approvals, we should be eventually able to finalize the request. And that's what causes our money to actually be sent out to our recipient. So just like we did with the approve button right here, we're going to add another button, and whenever a user clicks on it, it will call a function on our contract to finalize the request. So I'm going to go back over to my code editor. I'm going to go down to my render method, and I'm going to add another cell inside of here. Inside this cell, we're going to place another button, just like before. And this one, we will give very similar props as well. I'm going to give it a color of teal. I'm going to mark it as basic, and then I'm going to give it the text of finalize. So let's save this and just check out that neat styling that we get from those two props. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. Let's set up an event handler on this thing as well. So I'm going to say on click, run a helper function that you and I are going to define right now called this.onFinalize, like so. Then we'll scroll up again and we're going to define this function. So up a little bit, I'll define onFinalize. This is again going to be an asynchronous arrow function. And basically the logic inside this thing is going to look just identical. So we're going to again create our campaign instance, we're going to get our list of accounts, and then we're going to call a function on our contract. But this time we're going to call a slightly different function. So when we were approving a request, we called approve request. But remember, whenever we want to finalize a request, here's my contract file really quickly, we're going to instead call the finalize request function. And we need to pass in the index of the request that we want to attempt to finalize. So I'm now going to go back over to my request row. I'm going to create my campaign instance. I will get my list of accounts. And then we'll call our function. So await campaign.methods.finalize request. We're going to pass in the ID of the request that we want to finalize, and then we'll send that in as a transaction coming from accounts at 0, like so. So now we'll save this file, and we'll test this out as well. So if I go back over to my browser, I'm going to do a hard refresh on this one. And then when it appears back, okay, very good, I'll now click on Finalize. And now when I do, you're going to see that it says gas limit set dangerously high. Approving this transaction is likely to fail. So this is a little hint right here from MetaMask. And this hint is essentially telling us that it expects that if we send this transaction in, it thinks this thing is going to fail. In this case, it's absolutely correct because we do not yet have enough approvals tied to this request to actually get it approved. I still have to get at least 2 out of 3 approvals in order to finalize this request right here. So this is a very interesting feature of MetaMask that we have not yet discussed. Whenever we attempt to send a transaction to a function, MetaMask is going to attempt to simulate running that function ahead of time. So when we click on Finalize right here and attempt to invoke that function on our contract, MetaMask simulates running that function for us. When it does that simulation, it can then tell whether or not something inside there is likely to fail. In this case, it's definitely going to fail. So MetaMask shows us this little error message on the screen right here. This is a very important note because when you start working on your own projects, if you start to run functions that will fail, you're going to get this error message right here. And it's very easy to look at this error message and think, oh, there's something wrong with my gas value. Well, no, that's not it at all. Your gas value is totally fine. What's the problem is your function itself is going to fail, and it's not tied to the gas at all. So in this case, I'm going to reject this function, and I clearly need to get an appropriate number of approvals on this thing before I attempt to actually finalize it. So I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to make a new request that we can work with, and we'll continue in the next video and attempt to actually finalize a legitimate request that is ready to be finalized. So quick break, and I'll hook back up with you in just a moment.